Hey everyone, my name is Matt Workman, and in this episode of Cinematography Database Show, we're going to be breaking down the cinematography and virtual cinematography of a commercial called The Factory for a brand called Jean-Paul Gaultier, a French perfume commercial. So the reason I'm breaking this particular one down is because the company behind the visual effects dropped a really beautiful behind the scenes, and I think it's going to be really relevant for cinematographers that are just getting their feet in the industry or maybe are looking to get into the industry to understand how cinematography and virtual cinematography interact. Now, a commercial like this, you might look at it and be like, oh, it's all visual effects, but it's an incredibly relevant way of shooting, and it's something that I really want to help people understand and learn how to do because it's a great way to make money in the commercial space. And when you look at movies like Avatar, you look at Life of Pi, you're looking at Jungle Book, you look at movies like that, especially, this type of shooting is in demand. It's only going to increase in demand. If you want to work on a Marvel TV show someday, this type of shooting, very important. So to break down what else is going to happen, we are going to answer a question. I'm going to try to do that on every episode now. And in the middle for our tea break, which is coming back, we're going to look at really quickly some of the stuff we've been up to in Cinedesigner, and just to give you a sneak peek at that. And then we'll finish up by breaking down the virtual cinematography and the live action cinematography. So let's get right into it. So here we are. This is one of the best stills I think from it. I really like it. And this is the type of lighting that we're going to look at. And this is what we're going to be breaking down. This is a preview of it. So let's get to our first question here. So the first question is from Chris Opala. Hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Chris. Thanks for writing this comment or this question. It says, hey, Matt, great breakdown as always. I was wondering what the typical way of lifting the ambient ceiling atmosphere is done. As you mentioned, LED strips taped inside of diffusion were used here in this small space, but to cover a wider area and lift the overall tone a bit, what fixtures are normally used? Balloons, space lights, etc. This was a question during the Justin Bieber video where we talked about ambient and key. So I'm going to address this right now, and guess how I'm going to be doing it? We're going to be doing it in Cinedesigner. So here's a shot. Here's a scene I think that we're all pretty familiar with. So we have our camera up. We're in this room, and in this case, it's like a built stage. And this person's being keyed by a 1K with a medium chimera. Shout out chimera. So let's take a peek at what that lighting would look like. This is essentially what the lighting would look like with that scene. We have the one chimera on, and we've got this one nice singular shadow. It's kind of a very frontal commercial angle for the lighting, but there's still like a nice shadow side, which is cool. But we want to raise the ambient overall. Like, say this is feeling a little bit dark. We want to go for that more commercial look, just brighter overall. And what we don't want to do is add another light on the other side. A lot of people are going to add a light on the other side of the scene and start shooting that back towards them. That's going to actually introduce problems. You're going to get double shadows. That's what Roger Deakins calls a light sandwich, is when you do that. What you want to do is you want to add an invisible light. You want to add invisible lighting, which I call ambient lighting. People call it different things. So I'm going to show you one way to do that in a studio setting anyway. So let's bring in our ambient light. What this essentially is a 12 by 12 ultra bounce overhead, and we're going to bounce another 1K or 2K into it. And what that's going to do is that's going to fill up this frame, and this frame acts as a light, and it's going to evenly push light out straight down and all around the room. And that's how you do ambient lighting. In this case, I have two combo stands holding it up. But you obviously, if it's a wider shot and you want to move around, you could just tie the ultra bounce to the ceiling. Or if you're in a practical location, just actually bounce off of the ceiling with a light. Make sure that you're going to flag this light from getting any direct light on the people. I haven't shown that here, just to keep it a little bit cleaner. But this is one way to add that invisible ambient light. And let's see what this looks like. Here's our lighting with just the chimera. That's the lighting with the ambient on. So look at the lighting around the room. Look at the background lighting. Look at the walls. See how everything gets a little bit brighter? But you don't actually add any more shadows because the shadow from this is going down. The angle is going into the ground, and you typically don't see it. So this is a way of adding ambient light to the scene. In the Justin Bieber video, he made the ambient a color, and that's a way of invisibly adding color to your scene as well, is to bounce into the ceiling with a light. So this is one way of adding ambient, and in this breakdown, as we go back to talking about The Factory, the Jean-Paul Gaultier commercial, we're going to look at other ways of adding ambient, and like he kind of called out, those are space balloons and they are space lights. That's what you're essentially doing with those, is doing this. And I typically am a bounce person. I like to bounce for my ambient, but you can do it many ways. This is not the only way to do it. This is one way to do it. I hope that this has helped you in that way. Let's just look at it one more time. Just the key light with ambient. Just the key light with ambient. Hopefully that helps. So let's get back into this breakdown. So this shot here is one of the wide shots, and it's pretty cool, but you look at it and it's like, okay, I've seen Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the remake, and I've seen, like, this looks like, not the Polar, kind of like the Polar Express or something like that. You can tell that a lot of this is not going to be real. So what is real? Just looking at this, you can tell that, why didn't that show up? Oh, brush. Oh, I'm in the wrong brush. My bad. So we have this guy, you're real, you're clearly real, you're real, you're real. But how do we go about setting up this kind of shot? I think people are like, oh, it's green screen, and they check out, but there's actually a lot that goes into this, and there's actually a lot more than you might think is real. So let's break this down. Here's the comp where you see, like, okay, this is what CG is, this gray stuff, and you can see some of the CG lighting when you do it like that. And this is the actual behind the scenes. Now, this is my jam. This is like what I do. This is what I love to do. Many of my commercials go this way, and I really enjoy it. So let's quickly break this down. I guess black is going to be our friend here. Nah, let's pick green. Maybe this is the wrong color. So clearly the floor here, the horizon, pretty easy to call out here, is right there. So the camera is fairly low to the ground. Okay, what just happened? Sorry about that. We have to pull this back in, and we're back. Sorry about that. So we have our shiny floor. The camera is very low to the ground. Having the horizon this low means the camera is low. We'll have to talk about horizon in a more objective way eventually. But we have to look at what the goals are here with this shot. This shot sets the stage for a lot of the lighting moving forward. Now, clearly they have this framed with this big negative area. They know that something big is going to go there. So someone had to plan that. We'll talk about that soon. But we have the guts of the scene, the shot, the photography of it, the angle, the perspective, that is laid out in live action. You have to get that right, first of all. These people are also being lit. So let's talk about that lighting. In this scene, the way that they add ambient is with space lights, and they're putting black skirts around them. So this light's only coming out at probably around, I'd say, a 70-degree angle from these space lights. And that's going to push ambient light straight down, which brings the whole lighting of the scene up. But you don't really sense the shadows, so it's kind of an invisible ambient. That's what space lights are usually doing. In here, back in this big old box, and what we have here is teasers, 12 by 12 teasers, which I have these in Cine Designer. In there is more space lights, and it's putting more ambient light to hit these guys on the stairs in the back. Now, we also have these two, I would say, 5Ks with medium chimeras with grid. So without the grid, the beam would probably be coming out almost close to a 180 degree, but with the beam, it's more of a 60-degree angle from there. These are going to be edge lighting that, and it's going to be edge lighting you. You seem to be getting just mostly the ambient. Now, the other things to call out as we move on here are we have these lights back here. These are cyc lights of some sort. They look like sky panels or something like that, honestly. And what's surrounding this entire set is a big white, massive white cyclorama that's being held up by triangle shots, and those are being front lit by those cyc lights in the back. Also, to isolate this element here, because it's all shiny and beautiful and they actually built it, they have a blue screen behind it. And I believe that's Digi Blue. I didn't do my research if it was Digi or not. But this is going to allow the compositors to cut that out. And then likewise here we have a big white frame, which I think was either for lighting or just another way of giving something to cleaner to cut out these gears, because the perspective of it helps it make it look real. So let's look at that shot again after you add all the stuff to it. It's beautiful, and it's a combination of live action and virtual, of course, to make that happen. Is that it for this one? I think so. We're moving on. So we're going to move on to our next shot. So here's another wide shot. This is actually a dolly move, which you'll see. I think in the beginning of this episode, I'm going to start by showing a little bit of the commercial. I think that's relevant. And we'll talk about what's happening here. So the shot starts up at the organ or whatever's going on, and it booms back to this area. So there's a camera move in this. So let's look at some of the lighting that goes on for this. So in this case, we have a big matte box to stop the flare from the backlight that's definitely coming from this direction. And then on top of that, to get this nice edge light, we see a 12 by 12. And I believe it's being pushed through, though it honestly doesn't matter, pushing through and bouncing in this case a lot of the times. A lot of people don't agree with me that bouncing and diffusion are very similar in the end, but they are, and I'll prove that to you as we go on in time. You don't have to believe me right now, but you will. You will eventually. But they're pushing through. It's pretty hard, actually, despite the size of it. And that's what's doing this main edge light. And then we have, looks like a fill light from over here, which is probably just like a 12 by 12, again, returning more light. And then there's going to be space lights over this whole thing, giving ambient. On top of that, there is this backlight. So that's what's going on here. And the camera booms up, or starts up in the air and then booms down to catch them. But we have this big blue screen to help cut them out. And then the rest of it's just adding this white wrapping light. But we still have this really beautiful amount of contrast in here. let's see, we're going to move on to this shot. This is like one of the last wide shots. So this, you look at it, it's like, oh, it's like completely fake, right? It's like all there is this person, no big deal. The thing is, you actually have to get pretty deep because there's something about green screen photography that is actually like the purest form of cinematography when you're lighting just people. You have to really think method, like, well, you have to fake the lighting of the environment. You don't just get it for free. When you walk onto a set in the real world and you crank the ISO and you light, you're getting all this natural light from the floor, from the ceiling, from the windows. Light that comes through windows is not just white. It has so many colors. You get so much stuff for free. When you're in a studio, you have to make that up yourself. So in a way, to me, working in a studio and creating it all from scratch is actually more of an art. You have more of a brush. You're creating all of it, versus when you go on location, you're kind of working with what you got, and nature and what you got is usually pretty beautiful. That's why it looks so good. But when you're in a stage, you have to recreate that. So I have to put that in there, like which one's harder to do or which one's more you have more control over. I don't know. Everyone has their opinion on it. But look how much work went into this to make this work. So a lot of these glass reflections are real. And we've got a bunch of like 1Ks and ETC source 4s with colors, and they're going to be hitting up these different things to give different reflections and sparkles. And still, look at the beautiful lighting that's on her. You know, she's still getting a key from up here, and he is mostly eating ambient. But we have this against gray, essentially, instead of blue, because blue is going to infect these reflections. So this reflection in this panel, the reflections on them, if this was blue, it would be reflecting blue into their body. And that's going to upset the lighting a little bit, and it's going to be hard to dispel that. So that's a very modern compositing technique, and only the bravest of VFX supervisors will approve that for you, is to actually light the scene how you would light it. And then you're going to roto everything out, which is literally cutting it out. Kind of like what I just did with my pen. Someone does that frame by frame and cuts them out. So they're not relying on chroma keying in this case. Let's move on to our next scene. This is a massively complicated scene, and you can understand why, if you had to do this in reality, this would be insanity. Like, look how deep this space is. They're in like a big cylinder, more or less, the space. And it would be like this massive coliseum. And then to light outside the windows, you're just not going to do that in reality. There's just no way. I mean, some people have built set this big, but there's just no way. Have them walking on these gears and all these boats flying around. Maybe if the entire feature film took place there, they might build it, but it would be insane to do it practically. So they're going to use visual effects. They're going to use all the tricks that are possible, and it makes this amazing scene. So let's start breaking down how this thing kind of comes together. So first of all, this is our first look at previs for this commercial. Now, the entire commercial, and let me say this at this point, commercials like this in big movies that go down that require this amount of coordination between live action and virtual cinematography, the cinematography for those projects are not planned on set. And a lot of the times they're not planned by the cinematographer alone or at all. A lot of the times the director, agency, and previs team or VFX team will build the whole thing in 3D first. They'll do all the blocking. They'll even do a lot of the lighting, and they'll design all the camera moves, have it all lined up, because there's so much involved with executing this. Everything has to be pretty perfect, that a lot of the planning happens beforehand. This is true with movies. This is true with commercials. I've personally experienced it. I've shown up on many commercials where everything has been figured out ahead of time. And that's part of the reason I started Cine Designer, and the movement I'm starting is to get cinematographers in this picture, in this world. You can either accept that other people do this and you say, that's not me, that's cool, you just let them plan it, you're just doing the shooting. Or you can jump in and you can start to get a piece of this too. It's available to you guys now to start learning. So let's look at some of the photography that goes into this. Here's a very complex, interesting plate of it. But essentially you see that they have this custom-made track, and we have them moving around on it. And up there, they're standing in on these treadmills. Again, massive blue screen hung on triangle truss. The ambient for the scene are going to be these space lights that are silked. They're solided. We have this big, essentially this wall becomes a backlight, a big backlight. And that's how they set up the scene. So the perspective is all there. A lot of it is correct. But things like, how wide is this track? How tall is this platform? Where's the camera in relation? Am I on a techno crane? How high do I have to be? Even where these space lights are, even where this blue screen is, that sort of stuff you can figure out in pre-production, and you better plan in pre-production, because if you get there, you line up, you're like, you know what? We actually need 100 feet of blue screen. If you make that decision on the set or even the pre-light, you're sort of screwing yourself and the rest of the team. You're wasting a lot of money. This stuff should be figured out in pre-production, and this is how big movies are being planned. We're going to move into more of the cinematography, but we're actually going to take our tea break, and we're going to take a peek at some Cinedesigner stuff that I've been doing. Cinedesigner, you can go to learncinedesign.com to start learning as a cinematographer or a director how to do this stuff yourself. It doesn't have to be just high-end anymore. We can do it, and Cinedesigner is going to make your life a lot easier too. Oh, tea break, how I've missed you. So this was our last scene. And what I'm going to show you now are two quick little demos. And before I do this one, no, it's great. Let's start with this one. So here is, just like I set up in the other one, a little photo shoot. And I've actually worked as a photo assistant on some pretty big shoots for my wife, who has done quite a bit of this type of studio photography work. And I actually learned pretty much everything there is to know about strobe studio photography. And I've actually added, because one of our first users is a professional photographer, he actually made me, or not made me, but he suggested that I add this camera standard, which is how professional medium format photographers use to move the camera. It's kind of like a Fisher dolly in a way. This kind of cute 3-axis head, and this is a model of a Phase 1 XF. So this is all part of Cinedesigner now, build 2. It's not quite out yet, but it's going to be out soon. And the film back is correct for a medium format camera, because a 50mm on a medium format camera is much different than a 50mm on even a 5D Mark III or an Alexa or a Red camera. They're all very different. This program helps you keep all that straight so that when you frame up with this camera on a 50mm, you know what you're looking at. Really helpful. On top of that, I added all the standard equipment that photographers use. These are modeled after Braun colors, the standard reflector, the beauty dish, all that stuff. They actually output very accurately. The lighting, I'll flash really quickly to what the final render looks like that. It's all very cool. And the last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to try to keep these tea breaks kind of short, because that's when I'm mostly plugging Cinedesigner. We're going to go to this kitchen scene, and this is for my studio tabletop friends who do tabletop. Now, tabletop, it's like, it's so precise, like you can't do this in 3D. You actually can do a lot. You can communicate a lot with tabletop here. So again, oops, so I guess we'll just let it go here. This is the point of view of the camera. That's what I'm framing up, and you can actually start to art direct here and get the major things done. This is all very to scale, the focal length, the lighting, everything. So you can actually plan out pretty correctly what you're going to need to get done for tabletop lighting. And we have just a quick thing here, just like a 1K or 2K open face going through a 4x frame. Very typical way of lighting this kind of scene is to 3/4 backlight it. It would take an entire course to break down how you do even simple tabletop lighting and framing. But for the people that already know it and want to plan it just a little bit better, Cinedesigner now has some high-end photography stuff, because in the end, when you're visualizing lighting, if it's photography or if it's live action, there's actually not a big difference. When it goes to executing it in the real world, there's a big difference. But other than that, not really. So that's our quick look at Cinedesigner. And that does end the tea break. I try to keep it quick, but I want to show you in context with a real commercial or a real movie. Not every movie needs this type of planning necessarily, but no movie is hurt by planning this well either. I'll say that much. But there are commercials these days, especially commercials in big movies, big TV shows like Daredevil, that sort of stuff. You want to start planning like this, or you're just not going to get invited to the pre-pro party. You get to hang out and come in like 2 months later after all the fun stuff has been planned, and you just have to do it. That's not how I like to do it. I would much rather be part of the planning process. Okay, so that's the tea break. So this is a punch-in of essentially of that last scene, and this is like kind of the coolest shot, I think. It's really cool. It's like all these people walking on these gears, so maybe they're the ones like making the machine run. It's a cool concept. I mean, it's a little bit, you know, the imagery is what it is, but it's cool. I like it. So here's the shot. These are tracking marks very precisely placed to not be behind them. I think these are safety bars for them to walk on, and you can see that they are walking on treadmills. And then that gets replaced. There's these GoPros down here. Awesome. I actually have this exact little stand for mine. And again, we have our chroma blue or digi blue. Is that chroma or digi? Looks like chroma blue to me. Space lights are, again, the ambient. We're going to have some pretty hard kick and backlight. These look like it might just be hard backlight, or at least the exposure's high. And then this big source from up here, you can tell from her shadow that the source is going to be like kind of like up here, coming from this direction. And again, it's likely either multiple chimeras hitting each person, or it's a big 20 by bounce or key, something like that. I don't have a shot of it. And again, the overall ambient to keep this all very bright and very happy are these space lights shooting straight down. That's our ambient. That's why I answered that question in this post. Here's the comp of it. Here's a rough composite. You can see the edge light. And you'll see, again, done without blue screen. Done without chroma keying. Chroma keying is sort of dying. And there's other tech like Lightro, the light field tech, and depth-based capture. Chroma keying, we're not going to be seeing that pretty soon. You're going to look back at this stuff and be like, haha, that's when they used to chroma key stuff. Chroma key's dying. It's going to be here for a while, but it's going. It's old school. So chroma keying is not as big a deal as it used to be. So let's move on to this shot. Clearly a close-up here. Look how nicely they got the heel to land on that. It's beautiful. It sticks in there. There's motion blur. There's depth of field. Virtual cinematography is a lot of fun. I'll say that much, having started to light in 3D a lot more. Here's what the live action cinematographer does. You're shooting someone on a treadmill, you know, and so you gotta get the backlight right. You have this beautiful front light still, and you gotta have to get the perspective correct. And the perspective is usually handed to you from the previs, because that's when they figured out, you're like, you can't, as the live action cinematographer, be like, you know, this is an up angle. Everyone on the team would be like, hey, go sit down, dude. It's level. We're keeping it like that. Because everything has been planned beforehand, and you're screwing with the rest of the pipeline. If you start making creative decisions on set, it's really not usually allowed at all. Now, if you're in the pre-pro process, maybe you could have argued for some of that. But if you're not working in 3D and you're not communicating this stuff to the rest of the team, everybody else is working in 3D. Why aren't you? And here's the comp where you can see the CG version, the pre-comp. You see a rough chroma key cutout. And it's just a cool way of kind of like analyzing what's going on for the whole pipeline. So we're going to break down a couple more of these. This isn't too long just yet. I'm trying to speed this up a tiny bit. There's going to be a little bit of a format change coming up. So here's another cool shot of her standing there. I think you guys get how this is probably going down, but I think it's helpful to just keep seeing it. Here's the blue screen where they are going to cut her out. I think the blue screen really comes in when there's hair. That's really important. But again, over here, white, because the white's going to reflect into the floor and onto the main props. I see a big either 12 by or 20 by bounce or diffusion, and that's your main backlight. There's also like, are these sky? What are these? These are like French. I don't know what those lights are, but they're essentially sky pans or cyc lights. But there is going to be a hard source looking like to be coming at her as well, and this shadow kind of tells me that, how hard that shadow is there. And then there's just probably another big source from the side, getting this lighting done here and that. So big sources, big broad sources. That's how we light. So here's a good thing what I'm talking about. Look at the reflection in the ground here that's reflecting the white, and look at the reflection here that's reflecting the blue. You know, that's why we don't like, I mean, they keyed it out and they cleaned it up, but in general, on movies like Oblivion, and I mean, Claude and Miranda deals with this like every day. So do I kind of on my shoots. Blue in chroma key in reflections and on people, it's not always the best. It's not the best for the photography, you know? It's nice for post though, of course. So here's kind of starting to get down here. Here's another cool scene. So they're on this conveyor belt coming through here. So what is real? What is not? How do we frame this up? Here is the set. Again, this is blue. They're keeping the reflection in this metallic wall, which is very complex, keeps it real. Their perspective of the beams is correct. I'm seeing an ambient light coming down here. She's going to get a big, wide open key light that's probably off screen, like a big 12 by doing this. Lighting up the screen here, and it's mostly for her hair, I'd imagine. So a lot of this is real, and again, getting the perspective right is important because you have to, getting the framing here, a little change by panning over, being higher, being lower, looking up, looking down. Someone has to go and recreate the whole background. So if you start looking up too much, you're making them recreate way more than they might have wanted to. And they bid this very accurately, how much CG to add to each shot. If you all of a sudden tilt up, you might have just added $10,000 or $20,000 to that render to get the backgrounds right. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure that everyone knows what they get going through it. You don't want to bankrupt the VFX company by doing things like that. And that's what starts to happen. I won't talk about that too much. What happens when DPs start to like take creative control on set, it starts to screw someone else. And historically, that's not gone well for them. Here, pretty cool shot. Look at the depth. The field in here is beautiful, right? It's like, it's cinematography. It's virtual cinematography, but like the lighting that's going on back here and the depth of field is beautiful. There's even bokeh. I think this is a V-Ray render or Arnold. I'm not sure how they're rendering in, but you know, what is the contribution? What is the part of the cinematographer? It's to get the framing correct and to make sure that the lighting here on the live action element of the person sticks with the rest of the environment. And there's uplight, and there's a lot of things that have to go right for the live action cinematography, and it's a whole art and craft to match live action cinematography to virtual. And the more you understand about the entire pipeline, With videos like this, hopefully, the better the final project comes out. And that's the goal, is to make the final image the best it possibly can be. Here is some straight up beauty lighting here. Like, look at this shadow. It's very soft here. That transition is very soft, very frontal, almost no nose shadow at all. So meaning the angle is almost straight on. That it's called lighting on the nose almost. It's like you kind of pivot the light around the nose shadow, because that's what you're usually going for. She is keeping her chin up, which is good for directors that want to be able to direct beauty stuff. Chin angle, very important. And also angles. I'm not going to get into posing for fashion and stuff like that, but it's really important, and it affects the lighting. When someone doesn't pose correctly for the type of light, your lighting looks bad, and that makes you look bad. And a lot of that is this delicate dance between the director, the DP, and the talent. You know, that's why you'll see like professional supermodels and professional talent. Not only do they like look great in light in general, but they know how they'll walk into a room, they'll see the key light, and they know where to put their chin. They know where to put their body. They know how to angle to camera. This is stuff that they've done consistently for a long time. They've been coached by good directors, by good photographers, and by good cinematographers sometimes. If you have a good enough relationship, you can get in there and sort of coach it. You have to be very delicate with that sort of stuff. But just to say that the chin angle, you have to be very aware of that, because it's one thing to put a light there, but if they look away from the key light or they're doing funny things with the chin, you can't fix that with lighting. And you're not going to move the light every 2 seconds that they move. A lot of it is coaching the talent to get it right. Fashion photographers talk about that a lot, but I don't hear a ton of cinematographers talking about how important it is to get the actors to pose correctly, to have your lighting look good. It's really important. Here, look at the beautiful bokeh in the background. That's virtual bokeh, and it still looks really great, and it is still beautiful cinematography in the whole end. This picture communicates beautiful cinematography. And I think actually even having these tracking marks is going to help tell how much out of focus it is, because they're doing pretty accurate lens sims here. This is a very shallow shot. Like, really in focus are her lips, whereas it starts to lose focus on both the directions here. So it's very shallow. It's very cool. Another cool shot, again, this set would be bananas to try to light in real life. These are all stainless steel reflective objects. I can't even start to comprehend what it would mean to light that in real life. So, you know, what we clearly have going on here is that there's this central source in the middle of the perfume bottle, which is basically what this whole set is supposed to be. Kind of looks like a prison, or like the Star Wars, like Senate, if you guys know what I'm talking about. But yeah, so let's look at like what's going on with the cinematography. Again, chroma blue, maybe for the hair. Ambient is going to be these space lights and a big old soft source and a hard edge light as well. Kind of consistent. We're starting to see trends here. Another beautiful setup. Look at the lighting back here and the depth of field and the atmospheric perspective that's happening. She's very contrasty, less contrasty, super low contrast back there. It's beautiful. This is a beautiful image just like overall. And a lot of the atmospheric perspective is in camera, but they add a lot more to it in color correction and visual effects. So that is going to wrap it up for our look at the cinematography of The Factory for Jean-Paul Gaultier. And I hope that this provides some perspective for cinematographers who are just getting into the field, that you are more and more going to be required to work in this type of a pipeline. So it's previs, you doing your part to make sure that the live action cinematography is lit beautifully, of course, but your camera work, you're really working as a team now. The previs really dictates quite a bit of the camera work, because that goes into the post bit of how much you're going to show. Like I said, if you're prevising, you're planning to do a shot that's up angled, the VFX company needs to know, okay, we're going to build that whole background behind them. Now, if they're going to be doing level, or if it's telephoto, or if it's wide, all that has to relate back to the VFX company, how much they're going to build in CG. And there's money involved here. There's a budget that they have to stick to. So your job as the cinematographer is to make sure that everyone gets what they need. Even if the director doesn't quite understand this whole workflow, you need to be there with the previs team and the VFX team to make sure that you're delivering what the whole team needs. The director's not always there if it hasn't been planned in previs to start all of a sudden going 18 mil when it was supposed to be 100 mil. You can understand now why that starts to screw things up all the way through the chain. And what happens is, if the DP is not cognizant of these things and they make decisions that are poor and not informed by the planning, the VFX team is the one that eats the shit after. They have to do a lot of work to clean it up and deal with decisions, and then they kind of get in trouble from the agency and the production company, like, why isn't this matching what we talked about? Why is this taking longer? Why is this over budget? That sort of stuff starts to happen. Whereas the DP goes home and does something else, the VFX team, you really want to be looking out for them, because in the end is you want this final image that we're looking at to look beautiful and to get what the brand wants and to sell the product. That's what we're doing in commercials. So I hope this episode is helpful for people that are looking to get into the commercial side of cinematography. It's really where a lot of the money is. It's where the stability is in the industry. From someone who worked in features, music videos, and commercials, I will say that commercials is the most stable and the highest paying per day rate, per time invested in it. But even if you're interested in like, oh, I want to shoot the next Batman versus Superman, or, you know, the Dark Knight, or like, Dark Knight's a lot of practical, but like even Star Wars, which we'll talk about, a lot of VFX guys. If you want to work on that type of movie, which is the stuff that I'd like to get to, you have to be so fluent in this. And in my opinion, the way that younger cinematographers are going to be able to get into this field is with previs. It's cine design. Is to have a voice in the previs process, communicate to the director, to the production company, to everyone that you know this whole workflow. You know it. You know your part. You want to plan in it. You even can help with the CG lighting, because when you start to learn cine designer, you learn 3D lighting. I'm tricking you because I'm teaching you 3D lighting at learncinedesign.com. Go check that out. Watch some of the videos. We are going to be breaking down a movie on the next one. And honestly, it doesn't matter what movie it is. Planning in 3D beforehand and getting as much as you can down beforehand. Someone said it, one of the users said it really well. A lot of cinematography is so precise when you get on set. These little decisions are so important. There's a lot of live action cinematography decisions that are made live right there. But you want to get the big things handled in pre-production, because like when you get on set, you're like, oh, you know what? I'm going to do this little thing. That's why I have that huge crane in the background already ready to go. You can get done more because you've already planned it. You know, if you get there and you're like, oh, it'd be good to have a 20 by over there, you're not going to have time to get that done. You need to get the big stuff out of the way and planned out completely. So when you get on set, you can paint, you can do the little live action cinematography stuff, but that stuff all comes from good planning. That's how that happens. I hope this commercial illustrates that. When we get into breaking down The Jungle Book and some other movies along those lines, Star Wars as well, previs, I guarantee you every frame of Star Wars, every frame was previs beforehand. Every angle, every camera move, the lighting, all planned in 3D first. I almost guarantee you, I know the people behind it. ILM has been one of the pioneers of the previs industry. And Dan Mindel did an amazing job lighting live action sets. But again, you have to understand the DP's part and place in the pipeline. So that's it for this episode of Cinematography Database Show. Next week, like I said, we're going to be looking at a movie, and I'm going to try to answer another question. I'm going to try to stick to that. And thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.